No one dared approach the mafia boss's daughter, not even the staff. But when the waitress knelt down, asking, "Do you want a hug?" the girl's voice broke the silence, and the world shifted around them. Hey friends, before we start, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Your support truly means a lot and helps me keep sharing more heartfelt stories with you. Now, sit comfortably and let's get into it. Sophia Romano wiped the sweat from her brow as she carefully balanced a tray of expensive wine bottles, the cool glass surfaces trembling slightly under her touch. Her feet ached from the long shift at the upscale Manhattan restaurant, but she kept moving, navigating the sea of well-dressed guests with practiced ease. The clink of glasses and quiet murmur of conversations filled the air, but there was one sound cutting through the luxury and grandeur: a child's soft whimpers. Sophia's eyes instinctively scanned the room. In the far corner, near the forbidden section of the restaurant, sat a man and a little girl. The man's broad shoulders were slumped as he held the child in his arms, her face buried in his shoulder. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. Her face was pale, her eyes glazed, staring blankly into the void, her grip on the stuffed toy in her lap so tight that her small knuckles turned white. The restaurant, usually filled with laughter and polite conversation, seemed to pause in a collective breath as the tension around them became palpable. Sophia's gaze lingered on the girl. She recognized the emptiness in her eyes. It was the same emptiness that Sophia had carried with her for years, a silence born from grief and abandonment. She wasn't sure why, but something in Sophia's heart tugged her toward the table. The child's grief echoed her own from years ago, when she had been abandoned by the only person who should have loved her. As the sound of the girl's quiet sobs echoed through the pristine dining room, Sophia found herself walking toward the table, though she knew she wasn't supposed to. The staff had been warned to stay away from the Moretti family, especially the little girl. Even the restaurant's owner, Giovanni, had popped his head from the kitchen, his eyes nervously darting in their direction. "Grace, table 6 needs their wine." Marco, the head server, snapped from behind the bar, interrupting Sophia's thoughts. His voice carried a hint of sharpness, but it did little to stir her focus. She wasn't concerned about the wine. Her mind was focused entirely on the silent child. The man with the girl looked up, his piercing amber eyes locking with hers across the room. There was an unspoken plea in them, a silent request for help. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She had been warned about him. Enzo Moretti, the mafia boss who ruled the underworld of New York. A man whose name was whispered in fear, whose mere presence had the power to make grown men quake. But in that moment, all she saw was a father desperate to do something for his daughter and utterly powerless to help her. Sophia hesitated. She had been told to avoid him. Every server had been warned not to approach the Moretti family. But looking at that little girl, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. There was something deeply wrong here. Marco's voice cut through her thoughts, his tone harsh and sharp. "Grace, stay away from that table. Don't even look at them, okay?" He said it with such urgency that it should have been enough to make Sophia freeze in place. But instead, her feet moved forward. As she walked, she noticed how the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The other guests were giving the table a wide berth, their attention fixed on the strange scene unfolding before them. The father, Enzo Moretti, held his daughter in his arms, his jaw clenched tight in an attempt to mask the helplessness etched into his face. Sophia could see the exhaustion in his eyes. His face was hard, but his gaze softened every time it landed on his daughter. It was a look Sophia had seen before, but never in a man as powerful as Enzo Moretti. It was a look of deep, unconditional love, a love that seemed utterly powerless in the face of Bella's grief. Sophia's heart clenched as she approached the table, She stopped just short of the father and his daughter, unsure of what she could possibly do. "Hi there," Sophia said softly, crouching down to Bella's eye level. The girl didn't look at her. Her wide brown eyes were unfocused, staring into nothingness. Sophia's hand hovered over Bella's small, trembling hands, but didn't quite make contact. The child didn't react, but Sophia felt an overwhelming need to do something, anything, to help her. "You know," Sophia continued, her voice soft and gentle, "when I was little, I used to feel sad too. And sometimes, when I didn't want to talk, my mom used to hug me. Like moms give, you know?" Bella's eyes flickered briefly, just a tiny moment of recognition, and then, without warning, the little girl's gaze snapped up to Sophia. The faintest tremor passed through her lips. Then Bella whispered, "Mama?" The room seemed to freeze in that instant, as though every person in the restaurant collectively held their breath. Sophia's chest tightened and her heart skipped a beat. Bella's eyes filled with tears, and without another word, the girl collapsed into Sophia's arms. Sophia caught her in a gentle embrace, her arms instinctively cradling the child against her chest. She felt Bella's small body tremble against hers, the weight of months, perhaps even years, of grief and fear being poured out in soft, broken sobs. The restaurant was silent. Guests stared. The noise of cutlery and chatter now absent in the face of this unexpected moment. Sophia could feel the heat of Enzo's gaze on her, but she didn't look up. She just held Bella, letting her cry. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of Bella's sobs, the tiny girl's broken heart finally releasing the pain it had been holding. Sophia gently rocked her back and forth, whispering words of comfort. In that moment, everything else, the restaurant, the guests, even Enzo Moretti, faded away. It was just Sophia and the little girl, bound together by an unspoken understanding of pain and loss. Enzo finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "Please," he whispered, his voice low as if he couldn't bear to speak too loudly. "He's been like this for months. Nothing works. I don't know what to do anymore." Sophia looked up then, her eyes meeting Enzo's. There was something vulnerable in his expression, a side of him that most people never saw. The cold, calculating mafia boss reduced to a desperate father, utterly lost in the face of his daughter's pain. Sophia's heart twisted for him, for Bella. She understood now. The silence wasn't just a sign of fear, it was the weight of loss. Bella had witnessed something terrible, something no child should ever have to see, and it had taken away her voice. And in some way, it had taken away Enzo's power, too. "I'm here," Sophia said softly, her gaze never leaving Enzo's. "I'll help her." Enzo's eyes softened, a glimmer of relief in them. "I'll do anything. Anything you want." Sophia stood up, still holding Bella against her chest. The child's sobs had slowed, but the grief was far from gone. Sophia glanced over at Enzo, whose stoic expression betrayed nothing of the turmoil inside him. But his eyes, those amber eyes, were filled with something she hadn't expected. A quiet, desperate hope. Sophia didn't know what it was that made her move forward. Was it Bella's broken heart? Enzo's helplessness? Or simply a deep, instinctive pull toward the child who needed her? All she knew was that this moment was the beginning of something she couldn't walk away from. "Thank you," Enzo whispered, his voice barely audible, but full of gratitude. Sophia only nodded, her arms still around Bella. She knew that what she had just done, what they had just shared, was far from over. It was only the beginning. Sophia stood still, her heart pounding in her chest as she held Bella tightly in her arms. The little girl's sobs were fading, replaced by gentle hiccups, her body trembling against Sophia's, as if the grief she'd been holding on to for so long had finally been released. The silence in the restaurant, which had felt so heavy and oppressive just moments before, now seemed to be holding its breath. Every eye in the room was on them, but Sophia could barely hear the murmurs of the guests, the clinking of silverware. All she could hear was the fragile little girl in her arms, the broken sounds of a child finally giving in to her pain. Then, just as suddenly as the silence had gripped the room, it was shattered. "Mama?" The word escaped Bella's lips like a fragile whisper, a single breath of vulnerability after months of mute suffering. The entire room seemed to exhale at once, and for a moment everything else disappeared. Sophia froze. She had heard it. Bella had spoken. In just one word, everything changed. Bella's small face, still streaked with tears, lifted from Sophia's chest. Her brown eyes, once vacant and distant, now locked onto Sophia's with a fragile hope. There was fear in them. Fear of the unknown, of trusting someone new. But there was also something else. Something fragile and desperate. Bella had found her voice again, not with a shout or a cry, but with a single, trembling word that carried the weight of everything she had endured. The restaurant's atmosphere shifted, the tension that had hung in the air now replaced by a mixture of disbelief and relief. The guests who had been so uncomfortable moments ago seemed to relax, some offering quiet smiles, others exchanging soft murmurs of surprise. Sophia's heart beat in her throat. She couldn't believe it. This was the breakthrough they had all been waiting for, the moment that would start Bella's healing. Enzo sat in stunned silence, his eyes wide with shock. His hands, which had been holding Bella so tightly, were now trembling. His gaze flickered from Bella to Sophia, and in that instant, Sophia saw it. Hope. There was a flicker of hope in Enzo's eyes, the kind of hope that had been buried beneath layers of guilt and pain for far too long. He was overwhelmed, completely undone by the breakthrough that had just taken place. The powerful mafia boss, the man who could control entire empires with a single word, now looked as helpless as a father whose only desire was to see his daughter happy again. He looked at Sophia, his expression full of gratitude, but also full of something darker, desperation. Sophia's arms were still around Bella, but she wasn't sure how to respond to the weight of the moment. The girl had finally spoken, but it wasn't just a word. It was a crack in the wall that Bella had built around herself, a crack that Sophia could now see through, and inside, she saw a broken child. A child who had witnessed something so terrible that it had stolen her voice, her light, her laughter. Sophia whispered to Bella, still cradling her in her arms, "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." But Bella didn't respond. She simply nestled deeper into Sophia's chest, finding comfort in the warmth of someone who was willing to listen, to care. Enzo's voice broke through the silence. "She's been like this for months," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "After her mother, after the accident, she just stopped speaking. No one could get through to her. Not the doctors, not the therapists, nothing." His voice cracked, and for the first time Sophia saw him, really saw him, as a father. A man who had been broken by the loss of his wife and the pain of watching his daughter disappear before his very eyes. Sophia didn't know what to say. She had no words of comfort for him. She wasn't a therapist. She wasn't a professional. She was just a waitress who had happened to look at the right child at the right moment. But somehow, in the span of just a few minutes, she had broken through to Bella in a way that no one else had been able to. "I can't lose her," Enzo continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's all I have left." Sophia felt her heart tighten as she met Enzo's eyes. The man who was feared by everyone in this city, the man who could tear down entire families without a second thought, was now begging her, not for money, not for power, but for help with his daughter. The same daughter who had just spoken for the first time in months. "I'll help her," Sophia said quietly, her voice steady but full of emotion. It wasn't a decision she had made lightly, but she knew it was the right one. She saw how much this meant to Enzo, how much it meant to Bella, and how much it meant to herself. In that moment, Sophia realized that this wasn't just about helping a little girl, it was about healing herself too. Enzo's eyes flickered with a flash of something, relief maybe, before his stoic expression returned. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low and urgent. "I'll pay you anything," he said, his words careful but firm. "Name your price. Anything you want, I'll give it to you. I just need you to help my daughter." Sophia looked at him, torn. The money, the offer, was beyond anything she could ever imagine. But that wasn't the point. She had to help Bella, not for the money, but because it was the right thing to do. "I'm not doing this for money," Sophia replied, her voice steady. "I'm doing this because she needs help, and because I understand what it's like to feel lost." Enzo was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on Sophia with an intensity that was hard to shake. She could feel the weight of his stare, like he was trying to read her soul, trying to understand why she was willing to help. The moment stretched on, and Sophia realized that the man who had lived a life of power and control was now looking at her as if she were his last hope. He didn't speak for a while, and Sophia felt the tension rise between them. The air was thick with unspoken words, with things neither of them had said. Finally, Enzo stood up, his movements stiff, almost mechanical. He looked down at Bella, who was now sleeping in Sophia's arms, her breathing steady and calm. "I don't know how to thank you," Enzo said quietly, his voice filled with both gratitude and something else, something deeper. "But I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you're taken care of. You've given me something I didn't think I'd ever get back." Sophia's heart swelled with a mixture of emotions, pride, fear, uncertainty, but mostly compassion. She had no idea what she was getting herself into. Helping Bella wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline, for Bella, for Enzo, and for herself. Enzo left the restaurant with his daughter, his men trailing behind him, the weight of his world on his shoulders. As the door closed behind them, Sophia stood there, still holding Bella, her mind racing. She had made her decision, but now came the hardest part, living up to the promise she had made. As the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm, Sophia felt a quiet resolve settle within her. She didn't know what the future held, but she was determined to help Bella. And no matter how dangerous Enzo's world might be, she couldn't walk away from this. Not now. Sophia looked down at Bella, who was still asleep in her arms, and whispered, "I'll help you, sweetheart. I'll help you heal." But deep down, Sophia knew that in the process, she would have to heal too. And in doing so, she had just stepped into a world that would change her forever. The days that followed Bella's first words were quiet but filled with the kind of tension that only exists in moments of immense emotional change. Sophia arrived at the Moretti mansion each morning with a sense of purpose that surprised even herself. She wasn't a therapist. She wasn't trained to handle grief or trauma. But she knew deep in her heart that Bella needed something only a person who understood pain could provide: patience, empathy, and unconditional care. Bella was a difficult child to reach. Even after she had spoken her first word, the silence had not fully lifted. She would sit in her room, staring out the window for hours, clutching her worn stuffed toy to her chest. It was clear she still carried the weight of her mother's death in the hollow of her eyes. Yet in the small, fleeting moments when their eyes met, there was something new in Bella's gaze. Curiosity, hesitation, the faintest spark of trust. Sophia's approach was always gentle, never forcing anything. She'd start by sitting near Bella, letting the child guide their interactions. At first, Bella would only allow Sophia to stay in the room for short periods of time. She wouldn't speak unless absolutely necessary, and when Sophia would try to engage her in conversation, Bella would turn away or retreat into her own world. But Sophia didn't give up. She didn't have the luxury of impatience, not with this child. So, day after day, she returned, sitting beside her, waiting for Bella to take the first step. Sophia used toys to gently coax Bella out of her shell. A small tea set became the starting point. Sophia would carefully arrange the tiny cups, smiling down at Bella, waiting for a sign. At first, it was nothing, just silence, except for the sound of the porcelain cups tapping together. But as Sophia continued, patiently pretending to pour tea for an invisible guest, she began to notice small changes. Bella's gaze would soften, her fingers twitching slightly toward the tea set. Sophia would nod encouragingly, offering her a pretend cup. And slowly, Bella's hand would inch toward the small cup, her grip still tentative but growing more confident with each passing day. "Would you like some tea, Bella?" Sophia would ask, her voice soft and unhurried. Bella's response was always a quiet nod. Her lips pressed together as if the words were too difficult to speak. But in those moments, that silent exchange of trust was all Sophia needed. There were days when Bella seemed almost too distant to approach, her little body curled up in a corner, her eyes closed in silent agony. On those days, Sophia would sit beside her, not forcing anything. She'd tell stories, her voice soft and steady, weaving tales of childhood memories, of moments when she, too, had felt small and afraid. "Do you know," Sophia once began, as Bella sat on the floor beside her, "that when I was little, I used to be afraid of the dark? My mother used to tell me stories about the stars. She said each one was a little light to guide us, even in the darkest times." Sophia smiled softly at the memory, her voice filled with the tenderness that only a child could evoke. "I was so scared that one night I took a blanket and wrapped myself up in it like a cocoon. I pretended I was a butterfly, safe and warm. It didn't make the dark go away, but it made it a little easier to sleep." Bella had been watching Sophia intently, her hands still clenched around her stuffed toy, but her eyes had softened just a little. It wasn't much, but it was something. A tiny crack in the silence. And it was enough to fuel Sophia's hope. Sophia knew that healing didn't happen overnight. It wasn't about forcing Bella to talk or pushing her to face things she wasn't ready to confront. It was about giving her the space to feel, to process, and, when the time was right, to speak again. And slowly she began to see small signs of progress. One afternoon, as they sat together by the garden window, Bella reached for a toy car Sophia had brought with her. It was a small, simple thing, but it was the first time Bella had picked up something without Sophia encouraging her. She turned the wheels slowly, her eyes focusing on the movement of the car. "Look," Sophia said quietly. "It's moving, just like when you want to go somewhere." Bella looked up at her for a brief moment, her lips parted as if she were about to speak, but she remained silent. Still, Sophia saw it, an openness, a willingness to engage. As the days passed, Bella began to ask Sophia questions, tiny things at first. "What's your favorite color? Can I play with the blocks?" But it was progress, real progress. And with each step forward, Sophia's bond with Bella grew stronger, though she knew it would take time for the little girl to trust her completely. Still, it was enough to keep her going. Each day was a new chance to break through another layer of silence. Enzo, on the other hand, had been watching from the sidelines. His presence felt more than seen. He never interfered with Sophia's work with Bella, though he couldn't stop himself from observing the subtle changes in his daughter. Sophia was the one person who seemed to understand Bella's grief, and for the first time since his wife's death, Enzo felt a flicker of hope. There were moments, when Sophia was playing with Bella or simply sitting with her in silence, that Enzo would find himself staring at her, the weight of his past and present heavy on his shoulders. He wasn't a man used to feeling vulnerable. He had built an empire through power and control, but with Bella, he felt powerless. The guilt of her mother's death hung over him like a cloud, and the reality of what had happened to his daughter, watching her mother die in his arms, was something he could never undo. He blamed himself, though he would never say it aloud. The guilt was suffocating, and he feared that if he didn't find a way to help Bella heal, he would lose her, just as he had lost his wife. Sophia noticed the shifts in Enzo's behavior. She saw the way he would look at Bella when she wasn't looking, his eyes soft, filled with concern, as though he were silently pleading with the universe to give him a chance to be the father his daughter needed. He would often retreat to his study, leaving Sophia and Bella alone, but there were moments when he would approach, watching Sophia interact with his daughter from a distance. One evening, after Bella had gone to bed, Enzo approached Sophia in the living room. She had been reading a book to Bella, her voice soft and steady when Enzo stepped into the room. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held something Sophia hadn't seen before. Vulnerability. "You're doing more for her than anyone ever has," Enzo said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Sophia looked up, surprised by the rawness of his words. "I'm just helping her heal. I don't know how else to explain it." Enzo nodded, though his gaze didn't leave hers. "I know. I see it. She's starting to trust again, and I owe you for that. I don't know what I would have done without you." Sophia felt a pang of something deep within her that she hadn't expected. Enzo was a man of power, a man who could command armies, control entire industries. But when it came to his daughter, he was lost. And for the first time, Sophia saw him as more than just the mafia boss. She saw him as a father, struggling to do right by his daughter, despite all the darkness surrounding him. "Enzo, you're not responsible for this," Sophia said softly. "I know you're doing your best. Bella just needs time. We both do." Enzo's jaw clenched, his fists tightening. "Time. I don't know how much more time we have. Every day I wonder if I'm losing her." Sophia's heart ached for him, for the father who had buried himself in his world of power and control only to find himself helpless in the face of his daughter's pain. She didn't know what to say to him. There were no words that could ease the weight of his guilt. But there was one thing she knew for certain. She's not gone, Enzo. She's still here, and she's starting to heal. With time. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Enzo nodded slowly, his shoulders relaxing just a fraction, as though Sophia's words had given him something he hadn't realized he needed. Hope. But as much as Sophia's compassion had helped Bella, it had also begun to stir something in her own heart, something she wasn't ready to confront. The feelings she had for Enzo, the vulnerability she saw in him, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, it was all becoming more complicated. She couldn't ignore it. The attraction between them, the pull she felt toward him, was undeniable. But she knew she had to tread carefully. Enzo was a man with a past she didn't fully understand, a dangerous world she didn't want to enter. Yet, as she looked at him now, something in Sophia's heart told her that no matter how complicated it might get, she couldn't walk away from this. Not now. Not with Bella depending on her. Not with Enzo so close, but so far away. The path of healing had begun, but Sophia knew it would be a long, winding road, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to take it, but she had no choice. Bella needed her, and somehow she knew that Enzo did too. The mornings at the Moretti estate were always quiet, but today an unusual stillness hung in the air. Sophia had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the house, the servants moving about, the quiet hum of daily life. But this morning, the tension felt heavier, almost suffocating. She had been with Bella for weeks now, gently coaxing her out of the silence that had gripped her for so long. They had made progress, small, tentative steps forward, but the silence still loomed like an unseen barrier between them. Sophia sat beside Bella in the garden, the warm sun casting long shadows on the ground. Bella had been staring at a butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to reach out, but she remained still, watching from a distance. Sophia had brought a small sketch pad with her, hoping to encourage Bella to draw. The idea was simple. Let Bella express herself in a way that didn't require words. But Bella only glanced at the pad and then turned her attention back to the butterfly. Sophia didn't push. She had learned by now that forcing Bella to engage rarely worked. Instead, she simply sat there, offering her quiet presence as Bella continued to watch the delicate insect with an intensity that Sophia found both heartbreaking and beautiful. After a few moments, Sophia felt the weight of someone's presence behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Enzo Moretti. Always watching, always present, yet always a step away. She had come to recognize the subtle tension in the air when he was near, the way the house seemed to hold its breath in his presence. He stood just behind her, his silhouette dark against the garden's bright morning light. Sophia didn't turn to face him. She didn't need to. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, but this time she sensed something different in the air, a quiet sorrow, a heaviness that didn't belong to Bella alone. Without a word, Enzo stepped closer, sitting down beside her on the stone bench. He didn't look at Bella. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on the garden, as if the beauty of the flowers and trees could offer him some relief from the guilt and grief that constantly gnawed at him. "How is she?" Enzo asked, his voice low and strained. Sophia took a deep breath before responding. "She's doing better. Slowly, but she's starting to trust me. She's still not speaking much, but there are moments, small moments, when I think she's starting to feel safe again." Enzo nodded, but there was a visible tension in his jaw, as if even the mention of his daughter's healing process was too much for him to bear. Sophia could see the exhaustion in his face, the deep shadows under his eyes. He wasn't just tired. He was worn thin, his soul burdened by more than just the weight of his criminal empire. It was the weight of his past, of the bloodshed and violence that had shaped him, and of the hollow pain of losing his wife, the woman Bella had loved, the woman who had been taken from them both. She was always so full of life," Enzo said, his voice quieter now, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "Bella's mother, Isabella, she had this way about her, light, warmth. She would have been able to fix this. She always knew how to make Bella laugh, even when she didn't want to." Sophia glanced at him then, her heart aching as she saw the rawness in his eyes. It wasn't just grief, it was guilt. Guilt that he couldn't protect the woman he loved. Guilt that he couldn't protect his daughter from the aftermath of a life filled with violence and danger, the same violence that had stolen Isabella from them both. "She would have been able to fix this," Enzo repeated, his voice cracking slightly. "But she's gone. And now it's just me trying to make up for what I can't undo." Sophia remained silent for a moment, letting his words hang in the air. She didn't know what to say. She couldn't pretend to understand the weight of his guilt, the burden of his choices. But she did understand grief. She had lived through it, carried it with her for most of her life. And in that understanding, she realized something that hit her like a wave. "Enzo," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with compassion. "Bella's silence. It's not just about her mother. It's about what she witnessed. She saw everything, didn't she?" Enzo's eyes darkened, and for a moment the walls he had so carefully built around his emotions began to crumble. He stared at Sophia, as though weighing whether he should admit the truth. His gaze flickered to Bella, who was still staring at the butterfly, lost in her own world. The child was so fragile, so broken, and Sophia knew, deep down, that the silence she had carried for so long wasn't just the result of grief. It was the result of trauma. Enzo swallowed hard, his hands clenched in his lap. "Yes," he said quietly. "She saw it all. The hit. The men who killed Isabella." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Bella hadn't just lost her mother. She had witnessed the brutal assassination of the woman she loved. She had watched her mother die in the most violent, unforgiving way imaginable. "Bella wasn't just a victim of her mother's death," Enzo continued, his voice raw and bitter. "She was a victim of what I am, what I've done. I never wanted her to see any of it, but she was there. She saw everything. And now she's gone silent. She doesn't talk, doesn't cry. She just shuts down." Sophia felt a wave of sorrow wash over her. She had known that Bella's silence was more than just the loss of her mother, but she hadn't known the full extent of the trauma, the violence, the murder, the fear. It was no wonder Bella had closed herself off to the world. No wonder she had been unable to speak. She had witnessed a horror no child should ever have to see. Sophia took a deep breath, steadying herself. She wasn't prepared for this level of grief. But she had made a promise to help Bella heal, to be there for her in a way no one else had been able to. And now, more than ever, she understood how deeply that healing would go. "I'm so sorry, Enzo," Sophia said softly, her voice filled with compassion. "Bella needs time. She needs to feel safe again. And that takes time." Enzo turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a pain that seemed to reach deep into his soul. "How much time? How long until she can be the child she was before? I can't—" His voice faltered, and for a brief moment, he seemed like the man he truly was, broken, vulnerable. A father desperate to undo the horrors his world had forced upon his daughter. Sophia placed a hand on his arm, offering him a steadying touch. "I don't know, Enzo. But I do know that she's getting there. Slowly. She's starting to trust again. And that's the first step." Enzo nodded, his eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and something darker. Regret, guilt, fear. "I never wanted this life for her. Never wanted her to see the violence. I've made so many mistakes. I've destroyed families, ruined lives. And now my daughter's paying for it." Sophia didn't know what to say. She couldn't undo his past, couldn't erase the damage he had caused. But she could help him with Bella. Help them both heal in whatever small way she could. And in doing so, perhaps she could heal as well. Enzo leaned back against the bench, his hands running through his hair in frustration. "I've tried to protect her from this world, Sophia, but it's who I am. I can't escape it." Sophia's heart ached for him. She understood. She understood the weight of a past that couldn't be erased. She understood what it felt like to be trapped by your own choices, and as much as she wanted to help him, wanted to offer him some sort of salvation, she knew that his world was too dangerous, too complicated for anyone to save him completely. "I know," Sophia said softly. "But that doesn't mean you can't change. It doesn't mean you can't try to make it better for Bella." Enzo looked at her, his expression hard to read. For a moment, Sophia thought he might say something else, something darker. But instead, he simply nodded, the weight of his guilt still heavy in his gaze. "I'll try," he whispered, almost to himself. "I'll try to be better. For her." Sophia didn't respond. She simply sat beside him, watching Bella as she continued to stare at the butterfly, her small fingers twitching as if she were reaching for it. The road ahead would be long. The trauma that Bella had experienced would not disappear overnight. But Sophia knew that they had taken the first step, together. And for the first time since Bella had entered her life, Sophia felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could heal. The days had passed in a blur of soft smiles, whispered words, and tentative steps toward healing. Sophia's connection with Bella had grown stronger, though the silence that still hovered around the little girl was never completely gone. Yet with each passing day, Bella seemed a little more present, a little more willing to engage. She began to ask questions, innocent ones, like how Sophia made the chocolate chip cookies they baked together, or why the sun sometimes hid behind the clouds. There were still moments when Bella would retreat into herself, her eyes growing distant as memories she couldn't voice clouded her small face, but Sophia didn't give up. Each day she tried something new, a new game, a new story, a new way to break through the fortress Bella had built around her heart. Sophia found herself becoming more and more involved in Bella's life. What had started as a simple professional arrangement, helping a broken child heal, was slowly becoming something far more personal. Bella wasn't just a job anymore. She had become a little girl Sophia genuinely cared for, a child who had come to depend on her gentle presence. And, despite the boundaries that should have remained firmly in place, Sophia found that the lines between caregiver and something more blurred in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just Bella's progress that kept Sophia coming back. It was Enzo, too. As much as Sophia tried to keep her focus on Bella, she couldn't help but notice how Enzo seemed to be watching her more closely now. He wasn't intrusive, never overbearing, but his gaze would often linger on her when she wasn't looking. When she would sit with Bella, helping her through a drawing or teaching her how to count stars, Enzo would observe from a distance, his expression unreadable. Yet, there was something in the way he looked at her that spoke volumes. He was grateful, yes, but there was also something deeper, something that hinted at a bond growing between them. Enzo had always been a man who moved through the world with control. His presence was commanding, his movements deliberate. Yet Sophia had started to see cracks in the armor. In the quiet moments, when he thought no one was watching, there was a vulnerability in him that Sophia couldn't ignore. She had seen it the night Bella had spoken for the first time. The way Enzo's stoic face had softened with relief, how his eyes had filled with a gratitude so raw it almost broke through his icy exterior. Sophia wasn't blind to the effect she had on him, but it terrified her just as much as it intrigued her. Enzo was a mafia boss, powerful, dangerous, and capable of great cruelty. She had already seen glimpses of that world, the darkness that lingered behind the polished veneer of his wealth and influence. The lines of loyalty, betrayal, and violence ran deep in his world. And yet, Sophia couldn't help but feel drawn to him. There were moments when she saw him as just a father, deeply protective of Bella, doing everything he could to make up for the pain his daughter had suffered. Then there were other moments, darker ones, when Sophia would catch a glimpse of the ruthless mafia boss beneath the surface. It was a contradiction that both terrified and fascinated her. She didn't know how to reconcile the two sides of him, the father who would do anything to protect his daughter and the man who had built his empire on bloodshed. One evening, after a long day spent with Bella, Sophia found herself alone in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. Bella had fallen asleep in her room, exhausted from the activities they had done together. Building a castle out of blocks, making silly faces in the mirror, playing a game of pretend where Bella was the queen of her own kingdom. It had been a small but significant victory, one that Sophia savored, knowing that the walls around Bella's heart were slowly crumbling. Enzo had disappeared upstairs shortly after dinner, and Sophia assumed he was in his office, working. But then, as she was rinsing the last of the dishes, she heard his footsteps behind her. She didn't turn immediately, but she could feel the tension in the air as he approached. "Can I help you with that?" Enzo's voice was low, warm even, and when Sophia glanced over her shoulder, she saw him standing a few feet away, his dark eyes watching her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. Sophia hesitated, then shook her head. "It's okay. I've got it." There was a brief silence between them, and for a moment, Sophia thought he would turn and leave. But instead he took a step closer, and Sophia could feel the heat radiating from him, his presence almost overwhelming. "You've done more for her than anyone ever has," Enzo said quietly, his voice tinged with a sincerity that caught Sophia off guard. "Bella, she's starting to come back, little by little. And it's because of you." Sophia felt a warmth spread through her chest, but she didn't know how to respond. She wasn't doing anything extraordinary. She was just doing what came naturally, what felt right. But hearing it from Enzo, with that raw, vulnerable edge to his voice, made her chest tighten. He was thanking her. He was acknowledging her efforts. And in that moment, Sophia realized just how much he valued what she had done for Bella. She set the dish down, wiped her hands on the towel, and turned to face him fully. "I'm just doing my best. It's not easy, but she's making progress." Enzo's gaze softened, and for the briefest moment, his walls cracked just enough for Sophia to catch a glimpse of the man behind the cold, calculating exterior. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he murmured. "I don't want to lose her. I'll do anything to keep her safe." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know how to respond to that. She wasn't used to receiving such open gratitude, especially from a man like Enzo. He wasn't the type to show weakness, yet here he was, standing in front of her with his vulnerability laid bare. Before she could speak, Enzo took a small step closer. The space between them seemed to shrink, and Sophia could feel her breath catch in her throat. She had never been so acutely aware of someone's presence before. "I've never thanked you properly," Enzo said, his voice low and rough. "But I don't know how else to say it." Sophia could feel the pull between them, something deeper than mere gratitude, something neither of them had acknowledged before. It wasn't just the weight of his words. It was the way his eyes never left hers, the way he stood so close, yet still seemed to hesitate. And then, as if something inside him broke, Enzo reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from Sophia's face. His fingers lingered for a moment too long, a silent connection passing between them. Sophia's pulse quickened, and she felt an electric charge zip through her veins at the simple touch. She didn't pull away, but she didn't move closer either. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence hung heavy, the tension between them thick and palpable. Enzo's hand dropped to his side, but the heat of his touch still lingered, and Sophia's heart raced in response. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. It's not appropriate." Sophia swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. "It's okay," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. She wasn't sure what was happening between them, but she couldn't ignore it. She couldn't pretend that something wasn't shifting between them, something that felt both dangerous and inevitable. Enzo took another step back, his expression unreadable. "I should go," he said, his tone hardening as if he was trying to regain control over himself. "You've done enough for today." Sophia watched as he turned and walked toward the door, the quiet tension between them still hanging in the air. She remained standing in the kitchen, her heart racing, her thoughts a whirlwind. She knew she couldn't ignore the pull between them, the attraction that had sparked so unexpectedly, but she also knew the danger of it. Enzo was a man from a world she didn't belong to, a world filled with violence, bloodshed, and secrets, and she couldn't afford to let herself get lost in it, no matter how much her heart ached to stay close to him. As the door closed behind him, Sophia stood there for a long moment, her thoughts spinning. She had made a promise to Bella to help her heal, and she had made a promise to herself to stay focused on that mission. But as the night grew darker, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that the path she was walking had just become far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The attraction was undeniable, but so was the danger. And in that moment, Sophia realized that the line between the two had already begun to blur. The park was quiet that afternoon, the kind of peaceful tranquility that seemed miles away from the storm brewing just beneath the surface of their lives. Sophia had chosen this moment, this brief, golden stretch of time, hoping it would give Bella the space she needed to feel safe again, to remember what it was like to simply be a child. They wandered along the tree-lined path, the gentle rustling of leaves overhead, the only sound that filled the air. Bella had taken Sophia's hand, her grip light but steady, and together they made their way to a small patch of grass by the playground. Bella's eyes were drawn to the swings first, the movement of the chains creaking softly in the breeze. It was a simple thing, the kind of childish joy Sophia had hoped would help bring Bella back to herself. For a moment, everything felt normal. Everything felt right. Sophia smiled down at Bella, brushing a few strands of hair from the girl's face. "Would you like to swing?" she asked, her voice gentle, as if she were coaxing a bird out of a cage. Bella nodded shyly but didn't speak. Instead, she took a small step forward, her eyes fixed on the swings, the faintest trace of longing on her face. "Okay," Sophia said softly, taking a step back to give Bella space. "I'll push you." As she went to adjust the swing for Bella, the sudden sound of footsteps behind her caught Sophia's attention. She turned just in time to see the three men in black suits step onto the path, their eyes scanning the park with a predatory awareness. Sophia's instincts kicked in immediately, a cold knot forming in her stomach. The park had always been a safe place, a refuge where the outside world seemed to disappear. But now, with these men appearing from nowhere, the sense of safety that had been so natural just moments ago vanished in an instant. Bella's hand, which had been reaching for the swing, immediately withdrew, and she turned back toward Sophia, her wide eyes filled with a growing fear that Sophia recognized all too well. The girl was already retreating into herself, withdrawing from the world, her gaze darting between Sophia and the men who now loomed nearby. Sophia's heart began to race. These weren't just any men. She knew enough about Enzo's world by now to recognize the signs, the coldness in their eyes, the purposeful strides that betrayed no fear. They weren't here for a friendly chat. They were here with a purpose. "Bella," Sophia said quietly, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "We need to go, right now." She reached for Bella's hand, pulling her gently away from the swing, but before they could take another step, the men closed in. Their leader, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with a cold, emotionless gaze, moved forward with a chilling smile that made Sophia's blood run cold. "Don't move," he said in a voice that was too calm for the situation. The other two men flanked him, their eyes scanning the park as if expecting an attack at any moment. Sophia's grip tightened on Bella's hand, and she instinctively positioned herself between the men and the little girl, trying to shield her with her own body. The men didn't seem bothered by her presence. They were here for Bella, and they made that clear with a single glance. "You can't have her," Sophia said, her voice more firm than she felt. "You have no right." The leader chuckled darkly, the sound sending a shiver down Sophia's spine. "We're not here to talk," he said. "We're here to take the girl. You can either step aside, or we can make you." Sophia's pulse raced, her breath catching in her throat as her eyes darted around the park, searching for a way out, a way to protect Bella. She couldn't let these men take her, not after everything they had been through. "Don't touch her," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper, but there was a sharp edge to it that came from somewhere deep inside her. The protectiveness that had taken root in her heart for this little girl, this broken, silent child, had become something fierce and unyielding. Bella, trembling, clung to Sophia's side. Her small hand was clammy in Sophia's, but there was a spark of recognition in her eyes now, a glimmer of trust that had been built over weeks of care, of patience. Bella looked up at Sophia, her lips parted in fear, her breath coming too fast. "Please don't let them take me," Bella whispered, her voice barely audible. Sophia's heart twisted. "I won't, I promise, I won't let them take you." But as the words left her mouth, one of the men reached forward, his hand closing around Bella's wrist. The touch was cold, calculated. Sophia's body reacted before her mind could catch up. She shoved the man's hand away, her pulse hammering in her chest. "Don't you dare touch her!" Sophia shouted, her voice sharp with panic. She was trembling, but she refused to back down. The leader's smile vanished, replaced by a hard, cold stare. "You're making this difficult," he said, his voice low. "Step aside, or we'll make it worse." Sophia didn't move. She couldn't. Not when Bella was right there, looking up at her with wide, terrified eyes. And then, in an instant, everything changed. The leader lunged forward, grabbing Bella by the arm, attempting to drag her away from Sophia. Sophia reacted without thinking. She threw herself at the man, her body crashing into his as she pushed him away with all her strength. She felt his hand swing out, a flash of silver as a knife gleamed in the sun. It was too late. Before Sophia could react, the blade scraped across her side, a sharp pain exploding through her body as the world around her tilted. Sophia cried out, stumbling back as the searing pain bloomed in her ribs. She gasped for air, her body freezing momentarily as the cold steel of the blade had already drawn blood. "Bella!" she screamed, her voice raw with desperation. "Run!" But Bella didn't move. The little girl was paralyzed with fear, her eyes wide with panic as she watched the scene unfold before her. Sophia's vision blurred as she turned back to the men, determination flooding through her despite the pain. She wasn't going to let them take Bella. Not like this. Not now. The leader reached for Bella again, but this time Sophia was ready. She threw herself over Bella, shielding her with her own body, her blood mixing with the dirt beneath them. She didn't care. She would die before she let them hurt the girl she had promised to protect. In the distance, Sophia heard the sound of approaching cars. It was faint at first, but it grew louder with each passing second. The men seemed to hear it too. They hesitated, momentarily distracted. "Get down!" a voice shouted, and in that instant, Enzo appeared, his body tense and ready for action. Enzo's men rushed forward, guns drawn, and the masked men immediately froze, their hands raising in surrender. But Sophia, still holding Bella tightly against her, felt her body tremble from the pain. Enzo rushed forward, his face tight with fear and anger. He dropped to his knees beside Sophia, his hands immediately going to her side, the warmth of his touch sending a rush of relief through her. "Stay with me, Sophia," Enzo said, his voice strained. "Stay with me. You're going to be okay." Sophia tried to speak, but the pain was too much. She closed her eyes, leaning into Enzo's touch as his men handled the attackers. As the world around her slowly faded to black, she heard Enzo's voice, soft and filled with desperation. "I owe you everything," he whispered, his hand gripping hers tightly. "I'll protect you. I'll protect both of you." The next thing Sophia knew, she was in a car, her body wrapped in a blanket as Enzo held her close. The sounds of the outside world were muffled, distant, as she focused on his voice. The steadiness of his words. She could feel the warmth of his hand holding hers, the tension in his grip, and something else. Something softer, more desperate. And as the car raced through the streets of the city, Sophia understood something. She had proven her love and devotion to Bella. But in doing so, she had also proven something else to Enzo, that she was willing to give everything for them both. Everything had changed, and the path ahead would be more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The sterile scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, its sharpness at odds with the soft beeping of the heart monitor beside Sophia's bed. She was in a private room now, her side bandaged where the knife had grazed her skin, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the storm that raged inside her. Enzo had insisted on the best care. After the attack, he had taken charge of everything, getting her to the hospital, making sure Bella was safely settled, and staying by Sophia's side the entire time. He was a man who could command entire armies with a glance, yet here he was, sitting at her bedside, his broad frame hunched over in an uncharacteristically vulnerable posture, holding her hand like it was the only thing anchoring him to the world. It had only been a few hours since the attack, but the time seemed to stretch on forever. The events from the park had replayed in Sophia's mind 100 times, each memory more vivid than the last. The sound of masked men, the blade slicing through her skin, and most of all, Bella. Her wide, terrified eyes, the way she had frozen in place as danger had come barreling toward them. Sophia had acted on instinct, throwing herself over the little girl without hesitation. Bella was safe, but the cost to Sophia was more than just a physical wound. It was the emotional weight of what had transpired. She had crossed a line. She had crossed it for Bella, but also, in a way, for Enzo. The quiet hum of the hospital room was broken only by the soft rustling of Enzo's clothes as he leaned in closer, his breath warm against her ear. He hadn't left her side since they'd arrived at the hospital. His presence was constant, grounding her in a way nothing else could. Sophia slowly turned her head, meeting his gaze. His dark eyes were filled with something she had never seen from him before. Fear. Not for himself, but for her. The man who controlled so much of the world around him had no control over the raw vulnerability he was showing now. And it made her chest tighten in ways she hadn't expected. "You're awake." Enzo's voice was rough, and for a moment he seemed lost for words, as if the weight of what had happened had left him speechless. His thumb brushed lightly across her knuckles, a tender touch that belied the hardness of his exterior. "I'm fine," Sophia whispered, her voice hoarse from the pain and the exhaustion that had settled deep in her bones. "I'll be fine. Just a little scraped up." Enzo shook his head, his jaw tight. "You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have put yourself in danger like that." His words were harsh, but Sophia could hear the underlying desperation, the rawness in his tone. She squeezed his hand, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Someone had to protect her," Sophia said quietly. "Bella. She means everything to me." Enzo's expression softened, and he leaned in closer, his face hovering just inches from hers. His gaze flickered to Bella, who was sitting on a chair across the room, still wrapped in the warmth of the security blankets that Enzo's men had provided for her. Bella was quiet, watching Sophia with wide eyes, but there was a calmness to her now that hadn't been there before. She had been too afraid to sleep, too afraid to leave Sophia's side, but now, Sophia saw the faintest trace of trust beginning to bloom in Bella's expression. "You gave me back my daughter," Enzo said, his voice barely above a whisper, but the weight of his words was heavy in the room. "I can't lose you." Sophia's breath hitched at the rawness in his voice. She had seen Enzo as a man of power, a man who never showed weakness, a man who controlled everything in his path. But now she saw him differently. He was a father who had lost so much and was terrified of losing what little he had left. "I'm not going anywhere," Sophia said softly, her voice steady. She could feel the bond that had formed between her and Bella, a connection that had become something deeper than just a caregiver's role. It had become something maternal, something instinctive. She had promised herself she would protect Bella. But in that moment, she realized it was no longer just a promise. It was a bond she had made in her heart. Enzo's eyes lingered on her, his expression unreadable for a moment, before something flickered behind his gaze. He looked down at their entwined hands, then back at her. For a long moment, there was silence between them. A silence that carried the weight of everything they had been through. And then, with a deep breath, Enzo spoke, his voice low and tinged with something darker, something that had been hidden beneath the surface for far too long. "Sophia," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "There's something you need to know. Something I should have told you long ago." Sophia looked up at him, her heart racing in her chest. The room seemed to grow quieter, the air thick with anticipation. She didn't know what he was going to say, but the intensity in his gaze told her it was something important, something that could change everything. Enzo hesitated for a moment before speaking again, his voice rough with the weight of the truth he was about to reveal. "I'm not just a businessman, Sophia," he said, his voice quieter now, almost a whisper. "I'm not just a father trying to protect his daughter from the world. I'm a man who's lived a life of violence and bloodshed. I've killed men, ordered the deaths of people who threatened me, who threatened my family. I've destroyed entire families, wiped them out without a second thought." Sophia's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she didn't know how to respond. She had always known there was darkness around Enzo, had always known there was more to him than the polished exterior he showed the world. But hearing him speak so openly about his past, about the things he had done, made her heart race with fear. She had seen glimpses of his world, the ruthlessness of his business dealings, the shadow of danger that always seemed to follow him. But hearing him admit it, hearing him acknowledge the violence that had shaped his life, was different. She had never been afraid of Enzo, not really. She had seen the man who loved his daughter, the man who would do anything to protect her. But now, as he spoke of the bloodshed, of the people he had killed, she couldn't deny the fear that began to creep into her chest. "I didn't want this life for Bella," Enzo continued, his voice thick with guilt. "I never wanted her to see what I've done, what I've become. But it's who I am. It's the world I've built. And now, it's a world I can't escape." Sophia swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. She had known, in some corner of her mind, that the world Enzo inhabited was dangerous, that the bloodshed and violence were never far behind. But hearing him admit it, seeing the raw guilt and pain in his eyes, made it all too real. "Enzo," Sophia started, her voice trembling with a mix of emotions. "What are you asking me?" Enzo took a deep breath, his eyes dark with something that could only be described as fear. "I'm asking if you're willing to stay in this world with me. I'm asking if you're willing to be part of it. If you're willing to face everything that comes with it. Because, Sophia, if you stay, you're not just staying for Bella, you're staying for me, and that means facing everything I am, everything I've done." Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. She had been prepared for this moment, for the choice she would inevitably have to make. But now that it was here, now that the reality of what Enzo was asking her hit her, she didn't know how to respond. Could she really live in this world of danger and violence? Could she truly accept the man Enzo was, with all of his darkness, and still love him? "I don't know if I can," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her own fear. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this world, Enzo." Enzo's face softened, his eyes filled with understanding and sorrow. "You don't have to decide now. But know this, Sophia. If you choose to stay, I'll do whatever it takes to keep you and Bella safe. I'll protect you both, no matter what." Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself. She had come so far already. She had promised to help Bella heal, to be the mother she needed, and in doing so, she had already stepped into a world she never thought she would belong to. But now, as she looked at Enzo, really looked at him, she knew she couldn't walk away. Not from him, not from Bella. "I'll stay," she said softly, her voice steady now. "But I need to know that you're willing to change, for her, for both of us." Enzo's eyes softened with something close to relief. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For you, for Bella." And in that moment, Sophia knew that her decision had been made. She had chosen them, and no matter how dangerous their world was, she would stand by them, no matter the cost. The room seemed to exhale, the tension finally breaking, as Enzo reached for her hand and squeezed it tightly. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty, but also with a promise. A promise that they would face the darkness together. The soft glow of the evening sun filtered through the tall windows of Enzo's study, casting long, stretching shadows across the polished wood floors. The mansion, which had once felt so foreign to Sophia, had become a part of her world, an extension of the new life she was building with Enzo and Bella. Yet tonight, the walls of the grand room seemed to close in on her, thick with the weight of the conversation that was about to unfold. Enzo had asked her to meet him here, in the quiet sanctuary where he usually worked, away from the chaos of the world he had built. The air was heavy with anticipation, and Sophia could feel the pull of something deeper, more intense than the simple decision they had already made. Enzo had promised her that everything would change, that they would step into a new future. But there was still a part of her, the part that was afraid, wondering if they could truly escape the shadow of the life Enzo had lived. She sat across from him at the large oak desk, the faint scent of cigar smoke hanging in the air, remnants of a habit he was slowly shedding. The glass of wine in front of her remained untouched, the clink of her fingers tapping nervously against the edge of the glass, betraying the unease that settled deep inside her. Enzo sat across from her, his usually stoic face more relaxed than she had ever seen it, but there was still a quiet storm behind his eyes, a battle he had been fighting for far too long. Without a word, Enzo reached for the drawer at the side of his desk, pulling out a sleek black box. The moment he opened it, the weight of what was to come seemed to settle between them like a thick fog. Inside the box was a ring, beautiful yet simple. 3 stones set in platinum, glinting in the low light. The stones were perfectly shaped, each one representing a different part of their story, his, Bella's, and hers. He had been preparing this for a while, and as he looked at the ring, then back at her, Sophia could see that his nerves mirrored her own. "I've told you everything I can, Sophia," Enzo said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of the confession he had shared not long ago. "About the violence, the choices I've made, the things I've done. I can't change my past, but I can change the future we build together. But for you to be a part of that future, you need to understand the risks." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, though she already knew the answer. Enzo reached for his desk, where a laptop was open, and clicked a few buttons. The screen flickered, then a grainy video appeared. One that Sophia recognized immediately as a security feed. It was the footage of a car pulling into a driveway. Her heart hammered in her chest as she recognized the car, then the people getting out of it. The dark shadows of two figures approached the front of the house, and then the flash of violence. It was Isabella. Sophia watched, transfixed and horrified as the footage played out. The sudden, brutal attack, the men in masks, the sound of gunfire, the flash of the explosion as the car was set alight. And then, in the chaos, Bella, only a child, rushing to the window, her innocent eyes watching the violence that had torn her family apart. Sophia closed her eyes as the footage ended, the image of Bella's terror imprinted in her mind. "I didn't think she saw it." Enzo's voice broke through her reverie, his words soft with regret. "I didn't think she'd be close enough to witness it, but she did, and that's why she hasn't spoken. She saw her mother die, right in front of her, and it wasn't just the pain of losing her. It's the pain of knowing what kind of world we live in, a world I can't escape, no matter how much I want to protect her." Sophia's heart ached for both of them. She had seen the effects of trauma before, the weight it placed on the shoulders of the innocent. But this was something far more intense than she could have ever imagined. Bella had been a witness to murder, to a life of violence and retribution that no child should ever have to know. Enzo's eyes darkened as he looked at Sophia, his guilt impossible to mask. "I can't promise that she'll ever be completely safe," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't promise that we'll be able to walk away from this world, but I can promise that I'll do everything in my power to protect her, to protect both of you." Sophia's heart twisted in her chest. She had already made her decision. She loved Bella. She loved Enzo too, though part of her still feared the darkness that lived inside him. But despite everything, despite the world he came from, she knew what her choice would be. "I'm not afraid of the danger, Enzo," Sophia said softly, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I'm afraid of losing you both, of losing Bella. I'm already here. I'm already a part of your life, of hers. I can't walk away now." Enzo's gaze softened, and for the first time, Sophia saw something in his eyes she had only glimpsed before. A flicker of hope, of something that might just be worth fighting for. He reached for her hand, his fingers strong and steady around hers. "I'm not asking you to risk everything for me," he said, his voice breaking. "I just need to know that you're willing to stay, willing to be part of this family. I don't want to ask you to make the same choice I made all those years ago, but I need you to understand that this world we're in, it's dangerous. And it's not just the criminals we face. It's the families, the vendettas that come with everything I've done. I can't protect you from that." Sophia listened, her breath shallow, but her resolve strengthening with each word. She knew what she was agreeing to. She had seen the darkness in Enzo's world, the violence that clung to him like a shadow, but she had also seen the man who loved his daughter beyond measure, who would burn the world to protect her, and the tender moments they shared, the tenderness that only a father could show for his child. She had come to understand that he wasn't just the mafia boss, he was the man who would move heaven and earth for the people he loved, and for that, she could never walk away. "I'm staying," she said, her voice unwavering now. "I'm staying because I love you both. I don't need promises. I don't need guarantees. I need you to be the man I know you can be, for Bella, for our family." Enzo's lips parted slightly, as though he were about to say something, but he stopped himself. His gaze never left her, and the weight of his emotions hung heavily between them. Then, in a movement that took Sophia completely by surprise, Enzo reached into the drawer of his desk and pulled out the small velvet box again. He opened it slowly, revealing the 3-stone ring. "I'm asking you to be mine," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "To be a part of this family, not just for Bella, but for me. You're already my world, Sophia. I need you to be here, with me, forever." Sophia's breath caught in her throat as he held the ring out to her, the 3 stones glinting in the soft light. She could feel the weight of his words, the gravity of what he was offering. And then, without hesitation, she whispered, "Yes, forever." Enzo's eyes softened, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He reached for her hand, slipping the ring onto her finger as if it was always meant to be there. Just then, they heard a small voice from the doorway. "Does this mean Sophia is my mama forever?" Bella asked, her wide brown eyes looking up at them with an innocence that cut through the tension in the room. She had been listening from the doorway, standing there quietly, as if waiting for an answer. Sophia's heart melted as she looked at Bella, the little girl standing in the doorway, her hair messy and her stuffed toy clutched tightly in her hands. Enzo's arm wrapped protectively around Sophia as he glanced at their daughter, the weight of her question pulling at him more than anything else. Sophia smiled softly, her heart swelling with love. "Yes, Bella," she said, her voice gentle and full of promise. "I'm your mama, forever." Bella's face lit up with a wide, radiant smile, and she ran toward them, throwing herself into Sophia's arms. And in that moment, Sophia knew that this was her family now, together, despite the dangers, despite the darkness of the world they came from. They were stronger for it, bound together by love and commitment, and nothing would break that bond. As she held Bella in her arms, Enzo standing beside them, Sophia felt the weight of their shared future ahead. There was no turning back. This was her family, her dangerous, imperfect, but completely hers, and she would face whatever came their way with them, together. The future, uncertain as it was, had already begun, and Sophia was ready to walk through it. Forever. If you enjoyed this chapter and the journey of Sophia, Enzo, and Bella, don't forget to hit that like button and share this story with anyone who loves a tale of love, sacrifice, and the power of family. Be sure to subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Let us know in the comments, what would you do if you were faced with the same choice as Sophia? Thank you for being a part of this journey with us, and we'll see you in the next chapter.